As a child of the 80s, I truly appreciate what Super Woden GP2 is setting out to do. It provides both rally and circuit racing from an isometric top-down perspective that allows you to almost have a tiny indie version of Gran Turismo, where you've got a plethora of cars, loads of manufacturers, and a couple of different disciplines for you to really get engrossed into. The whole point of Super Woden GP2, though, is to master the Scandinavian flick, because this game has a very unique and bespoke physics style that, when combined with the isometric view, means that you have to A, get used to the mechanics, but B, then know exactly how to flick the car in when you're going around the different rally stages or circuits that you're trying to race against. This takes time to master, but the more you master, the more satisfying this game becomes. And what I will say is that if you've got the original, whilst quite a chunk of this game has been repurposed into the sequel, you'll see some of the same cars and some of the same tracks reappearing. Everything here has been finessed and refined, making Super Woden GP2 definitely the most definitive version of the Super Woden GP games out there of the two so far. Career is where you'll spend most of your time in Super Woden GP2, starting off with a single car and taking it racing. That'll be some kind of street car that you might be able to spend some additional credits, improving the brakes, the tyres, the suspension, maybe upgrade the engine or the gearbox, or if you're a bit crash happy, because all of these cars come with crash damage and will blow up if you crash them too much, you can improve the chassis' rigidity too. Not only that, but in between races you can then give it a nice little clean and polish, and you can change its oil, which does affect the top speed and the gear changes of the car if you let it completely run dry and get old. However, you'll be taking this car, taking it racing, and trying to place in the races. Doing so will earn you more credits, which allows you to then buy more cars or get more upgrades, but you'll also accrue stars if you win either specific events in the weekend mode, or if you go into championships, which have got multiple races, or rallies that have multiple stages. If you win those, you'll then score additional stars, which then unlocks more things for you to go racing, but also some bonus cars that can help you keep stepping forward in the career progression. You will still run into some cases where you might need to repeat some of the earlier races again, but doing so with different cars will sometimes reward different results. And the interesting thing around this is that if you are going back through previous events that you've done, if you take on board new cars and you've upgraded them, the real kind of crux here is that every single race has a fastest lap leaderboard, depending on the circuit and the event that you're running. So you might be going around bashing all of the AI that are running on slightly slower cars, but you'll be going against everyone else on online leaderboards, making sure that Super Woden GP2 is constantly connected, and having an online connection is really helpful because there's always this online competitive element that runs throughout every single event and race that you do. The real challenge with Super Woden GP2 comes from the merger of isometric racing and really tight Scandinavian flicking in the physics. Picking off the isometric stuff first, the camera is adjustable and you can go into the options and zoom it out, but I didn't feel like I needed to because the game gives you a boop boop and like a little exclamation mark on screen when you're coming up to a corner where you know you're going to need to do something. So I used those as visual and audio cues, and as I learnt the track and had the mini-map on the side, I was kind of understanding exactly what I needed to do with my car. However, if you don't understand having two eyes in different places at the same time and are able to multitask that, zoom the camera out and it will be easier for you to understand. You'll also have the added fun of being able to see more about what's coming up on the track in front of you, which I appreciate for people that haven't grown up with isometric racing like I did. You might kind of find this a bit alien. The real trick here though is in the physics, and the best circuit to really get to know this game and how it works is Ishikawa Raceway, which is the pretend Tsukuba track in the game. There's 3 hairpins in this track, and they're all of different radiuses and tightness. And so, because you need to position your car right the way to the edge of the track and U it in, if that makes sense. So instead of Ving it, where you kind of angle yourself like in a very straight line for the centre, do a really tight turn and come back out again. This game is all about U-ing things so that you have the minimal amount of speed scrub, because you can drift your car in by Scandinavian flicking it. Doesn't matter if it's a road car or a rally car or a drift car or a BTC car or a DTM car, they're all flickable. And this is the thing that you need to kind of get your head around, is that sometimes what appears to feel like the traditional racing line, if you V things, will just not work here, because the low gearing ratio of acceleration penalises you for being too tight on a turn. And so what you're doing is trying to scrub it around, kind of around the apex and the racing line, but trying to drift it through. What that then does in turn, and what makes Super Woden GP2 very enjoyable to play, is that the AI clearly know that you're going to be trying to do that, and if you give them a sniff, they'll dive bomb you. And it takes a little while to get used to, but they quite often are able to carry better speed, certainly than I did, going round a tighter line sometimes, but they'll also nudge you out wide. And one of the things that's very much more Arcadian with this game is that if you can throw your car in and nudge your rear off someone else's front, you'll get a lovely speed boost back off the corner again. And like, there is definitely a tactical bumper car version for some of the early corners and laps in a race, so long as you've got enough damage to get away with it. This all combines together to make a really engrossing experience. However, as with the first one and as with all isometric racing, you do need to take into account the gradient of the track and also just the perspective warp that you get with isometric racing. So for example, there's a couple of ovals in this game, and one corner, like, it's really difficult to tell whether or not you're going to spank the barrier on the inside or not, because it's banked as well as from that isometric perspective. And one of the other things, and probably one of the best examples of this, would be the pretend Laguna Seca track here. As you're going up the hill to then get into the corkscrew looks quite flat, but you can tell A, from the engine note, but B, from some of the surrounding like topography, that actually you are going uphill and then you're going to bounce back downhill again. And so you have to kind of tune yourself into the surroundings, because that is going to heavily change what kind of Scandinavian flick you're going to do into some of these corners, and whether you even need to at all. There's a track really early on, like Denise Street, where you go up into there's a hairpin that's at the top of a hill that you go down and up, you go up and down on either side of it. And actually, if you just take a wide line in, you can pretty much just turn in normally with a lot of the slower cars and not flick at all, and you carry more momentum. So you really do have to learn the tracks, learn the topography, and then learn how is best to flick the individual car that you've got. There's over 180. They all handle differently. Some of them are super cute, some of them are beasts. As the more you get up the speed ratio, the more difficult they are to handle, and also usually the more damage occurs to them when you then crash them into a wall. And this becomes particularly pertinent when you come into endurance races. These are 15 lap races, and they'll switch from night to day or day to night, and paramount to that is making sure that you don't crash up and blow up your car. If you do end up on low damage, it does slowly replenish the very last bit over time, as long as you keep your nose clean. So there is kind of a get out of jail free if you need it. Alongside this, you also have the arcade mode, which allows you to go and place in a time on a leaderboard with a proper CRT filter on it, which I didn't personally like, so I kind of dipped in and out of arcade mode and didn't spend too much time in it. But then there's also a daily challenges, or a weekly challenge mode, sorry, not a daily challenge, a weekly challenge mode. And this is free events where everyone is submitting their fastest times onto the online leaderboards. This is great. I've seen some of my mates on the leaderboard around me, and I'm like, how did you manage that? But with repetition, you can keep trying to get up that leaderboard, and it's very handy to see your own ghost car alongside, because then you really start to see how all of those flicks really make a tiny bit of difference. Because sometimes it doesn't look initially like you're making much headway compared to a previous lap until you see it side by side, and you go, actually, cutting there is a good call. Up to 4 players can play in split screen multiplayer. I do think this game would work really, really well, so long as everyone enjoys a good racing game. This isn't the kind of game that you'd pull out for like a Mario Kart, because there is real finesse and a requirement to learn how this game plays. Otherwise, I think people would end up spinning off into a barrier by oversteering, or just like tanking it straight off when it comes to the first hairpin bend. So you will have good fun with local multiplayer. Just remember, everyone needs to have like a little bit of practice before you get going. Otherwise, I think you'll have some people getting a bit stroppy. Last but not least, I also wanted to shout out that there is a pretty cool nostalgic Sega Park style arcade soundtrack, which has got all of the 90s dance and Eurobeat stuff on there, with a bit of chiptune thrown in for good fun too. I really enjoyed my time with Super Woden GP2. I think there's 2 different audiences here. If you've not played the first game, then this is a high recommend, because everything that's here is a step improvement on the original. Plus you've got the online interconnectivity, the online leaderboards, as well as the events that are taking place. So it's got something constantly dropping in all the time for you to go and explore and play and race. If you've got the original, then I think perhaps you need to consider whether or not you want more stability and predictability in your physics engine, because that's really the big selling point here for Super Woden GP2 over the original. When I went back to play the original, because I had this like weird, this feels so much better, but I need to put my finger on why. And the original one was a bit too snappy and on the nose, so you either got a corner right or it was horrifically wrong. Whereas with Super Woden GP2, there's more of a grey area where you can sling and hold on to a car as best as possible, rather than it being either on or off and feeling quite binary switchy. This is the big kind of selling point for me for Super Woden GP2, because it makes it much more approachable, easier to learn, but it also feels like you're learning a craft as you go through this game, so that when you get up to the real beastly cars towards the end of the game and you've really like powering around in a 500 HP like ginormous supercar going around pretend Monza, it really does feel satisfying that you're spanking the Lesmos and the Parabolica in the perfect way, so that you can then bope out, get into the slipstream and blast past someone else for the finish line. Super Woden GP2, thumbs up from me. Comments and questions, leave them down below and I'll try my best to answer. Take care. Higher Plane Games is part of the Higher Plane Network, a completely independent media outlet supported by people like you. The goal is to create the best possible content that cultivates a richer indie scene for games as well as music and entertainment. To find out more and to get involved, visit patreon.com/higherplane-network. Your support makes all the difference, and in return you'll gain access to bonus content and downloads. Thank you for watching.